Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a specific book, but because it is the end of one month and the beginning of another, I want to do my usual wrap-up and TBR video. In terms of what I read in April, I feel like there was a string of meh or just so-so books that didn't really live up to my expectations of what they would be. That's partially on me, but also somewhat on the authors for not really trying to do anything more than maybe what they were doing, that they just settled for average when they could have been good. But again, that's also partially on me. But I'm looking at good things on the horizon. A lot of really solid manga or comic book or just general books that I've been wanting to get to, especially some pretty good short stories and some longer books that I've been wanting to check out as well. In addition to that, there's a new thing that I'm going to be doing with Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. It's a challenge video of sorts, or it's not a challenge video. It's us watching movies and then talking about those movies. Like once a month, we're going to be doing that. I don't want to make it the entire focus of this channel, as I said in the announcement video, but I do want to talk more about movies, given getting that opportunity and being able to do so with Lucas. Whether or not we actually continue together down the road, that remains to be seen. But for now, we're going to be talking about Autumn Sonata, so be on the lookout for that. I also did a challenge video, a poetry challenge video in April. That was a lot of fun too. And I also watched Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret at the end of April, the movie that recently came out. As you know, if you remember the video I made, I really enjoyed Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And the movie was of similar quality, especially the young actresses that they got were really good. And Rachel McAdams is in it, and she's always a real shining star in anything that they put her in. So I definitely recommend it to you out there if you are interested in, coming of age stories and stuff like that. That might be something that interests you. But yeah, a lot of interesting stuff on the horizon. So without further ado, let's talk about what I read in April and what I plan to read in May, and we'll move on from there. So in terms of what I read in April, the wrap up for books, I read Passing by Nella Larson, which I thought was great. Potentially one of the best of the month. There are a few other books that are competing with that moniker, but I really liked the psychological storytelling and the way she navigated the tragic events at the end of the story were also pretty good. And then I also read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, also really great. I especially liked how he told the story sort of through the eyes of a child, given that the protagonist was a young boy. It's no easy feat to be able to tell a story like that, and it has all the usual Gaiman hallmarks of magic and terrifying evil creatures, and sometimes a plot that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but he's trying. So it's obvious Gaiman focuses more on sort of the atmosphere a lot of the time rather than the plot elements. But I think he really makes a lot of interesting characters and combines it with a sort of fascinating mythology that he's created. And it ended up here at least being something really solid that I recommend that you check out if you're looking for another Neil Gaiman recommendation. I also read Homer's The Iliad, which I thought was mostly boring. I felt Homer was just naming or listing off the names of people every so often, and just the act of war was very boring itself. But I do like the sort of Game of Thrones level shenanigans that took place with the gods, which I think could make for interesting TV if they ever adapted the Iliad down the road. But unfortunately, it was very hindered by just being so boring, just so much to say so little. It wasn't a joy to read at times. So I am looking forward still to reading the Odyssey, but I do hope it's a lot better than the Iliad. And then I also read Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol Clover. Thought it was mostly fine. I liked what she had to say about horror movies and sort of the in-depth analysis that she did, because it's always important to, review and talk about movies, because they always have messages that they're sending out. If you don't carefully examine those messages, it can be a doozy for any society. But it also came off as like a largely academic work, and it could be very hard for anyone, including me, to really get into that and be fully invested, knowing that it's more academic than it is like applicable to your daily life. I also read Berserk Volume 1 by Kentaro Miura, which I thought was amazing. I really liked the art, and like there's not a whole lot of depth to the story, but what is there is pretty solid. And I'm very much looking forward to reading the next couple of volumes in May. And then Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene, which I thought was largely meh. That's where the string of meh comes from, and that it's certainly an interesting kind of historical piece, but it focuses more on like the main character than it does on the sort of underlying political satire that Graham Greene wanted to focus on, or the sort of diplomacy issues that were taking place. And I feel like if you focused more on that than the really boring main character, like it could have been more interesting and exciting. But the Graham Greene chose to focus on the main character, who like yeah, I know it's supposed to be a joke, but it's a joke that it's a joke, in my opinion. It's not very good in that way. And then I also read They Eat Puppies, Don't They? Which was another bit of a satire, sort of taking place in 2012 and focusing on like a defense lobbyist who incites public public anger towards the Chinese by convincing them that they're trying to murder the Dalai Lama. And the idea is it's supposed to be a satire of the politics of the time, and it very much is of its time, like talking about, oh, this is the hottest politics of 2012, and not really something that stands the test of time. And I feel like if the author had really worked more in trying to make it more timeless and make it say something rather than focusing solely on the main character and their boring love life. Like you could have had something more substantial, but again, there's that missed potential really kind of ruins the story and makes it a slog to get through. And then I also read Batman, the Black Mirror, just one of your standard, not really interesting Batman comics, talking about a secret society that's been living in Gotham for some time. It's one of those stories that exists between 2008 and like 2013, before they rebooted the entire DC continuity, where you just had a string of Batman comics that were not to my liking, that tried to make Batman more than what he was, and it comes off as trying to change too much about a character, or changing too much about the rules of the world that this character lives in, and it's not my favorite. And then also I read Squad by Maggie Takuda Hall, which was fine. Certainly some interesting things to say about like queer awakenings or feminist awakenings, but also it feels like a lot of this is just like a pastiche without the character, or without the author Takuda Hall like trying to actually say anything about like feminism or like these queer awakenings. She's just using it as a fancy backdrop for her story. Also, the main character like actually eats human beings as a werewolf, and they're given a happy ending without anyone really commenting on that. And I find that very strange. I also read Ella Enchanted, which I thought was lots of fun. I do like Gail Carson Levine's sort of like satire send up of fairy tales and those stories like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. And also her commentary on obedience and what that means for teenagers. It's a very interesting. So I definitely understand why it won the awards or the nominations that it won. And it's a very I think it's probably going to be considered more of a modern classic as time goes on. And then I read a number of short stories as well. The City of Refuge by Rudolph Fisher, which I thought was just okay. Hospital Story, a very forgettable short story about a person who is thinking about their mother in the hospital in the creepiest way imaginable. But because it's so forgettable and just so bland, there's not a whole lot to talk about there. And then The Girl Who Got Rattled by Stuart Edward White. That was later adapted into a short story or vignette in The Battle of Buster Scruggs, which was a really good adaptation, although this one is a little too sexist and misogynistic for my taste, racist as well. Like the author, like you can ignore it, but the author seems to go out of their way to bring up like sexism or racism whenever possible. So it's not ideal. And then I also read How My Brother Leon Brought Home a Wife by Manuel Arguia, a pretty solid short story. I do like the comparison that Arguia makes between the Philippines and rural areas versus the Philippines and urban areas, and the differences and how love can come together from those 2 points. Definitely probably one of the better short stories that I've read for April and for this year as well. And then I read a number of poems, and I even made a challenge video. Go check out my Poetry Thursday videos to find out more details on that. But what do I plan to read for May? Well, for my TBR, I have a number of books and short stories and whatnot planned. For books, I am currently reading Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I am making my way through the Stormlight archives. I'm somewhat of a fan of Words of Radiance thus far. It was harder to get into the Way of Kings because there was so much world building, but with Words of Radiance, he's getting right into it. By right into it, I of course mean 150 pages into the book, he's getting right into it. Again, there's that whole problem where Brandon Sanderson feels the need to take up 1,200 pages of your time when he could do it in significantly less. But that's something I'll talk about again in the video I make for it. But it is pretty good right now. And then I also want to get through Berserk 2 and 3, which I bought. So be on the lookout for that. And if you're following along with me, make sure to read Berserk Volume 2 and 3 in the next month. I also bought Neverwhere from my local library. Neverwhere is by Neil Gaiman. So I am once again reading another Neil Gaiman book. It feels like I'm never going to stop reading him or something. But there's a good point to be made in that I'm probably going to have to make an author video sort of exploring everything about Neil Gaiman, especially because I've read quite a bit of him, so I feel like I can talk a little bit more about the themes and the ideas and the stuff that comes up in his writing and my overall opinion of him. Kind of like what Lucas does over at the Bits of Lit, although he explores authors like Kurt Vonnegut and whatnot, whereas I'm over here just looking at Neil Gaiman, who probably doesn't have the notoriety that Vonnegut does. But I certainly like reading Gaiman more than I do Vonnegut, so whatever that means there. I also want to read a number of books from my local library. I even found volume 3 and 4 of Scott Pilgrim, which I was reading through, but it wasn't to my liking, so I decided I wasn't going to buy it anymore. But I do want to get through it because there are some interesting qualities of the series, so be on the lookout for that. And I also want to read Crying in H Mart by Zahner, which was a book club read for this month. If you want to be a part of book club, definitely click the Discord link in the description so that you can connect with Bevan and me and everyone else who's part of book club, and you can get the information about that. We're always willing to have more people talk about books with us. And then also I'm going to be talking about Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This is another Bevan recommendation from the Google Drive list that we shared together. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to reading some more social justice related stuff that she throws in my direction. Whether or not I actually talk about it on this channel, it remains to be seen, but that's going to be something that will be passing by my eyes in the coming month. I also have a number of short stories planned, including one by Monica De Nieco, which I've already made a video about, so be on the lookout for that. And also by Virginia Woolf, there's a short story I want to get to. I'm actually surprised I haven't read anything by Virginia Woolf yet, given how popular she is as an author. Also, given that Lucas over at the Bits of Lit talks about her somewhat frequently. I know he went through a couple of her books in the recent past, but I'm just surprised I haven't gone through her, given her notoriety and whatnot. But I'm fixing that right now, it seems, and then a number of other short stories that I'll talk about as I encounter them. And then I also have a number of poems planned for the month of May. Much like last year, I do want to talk about some LGBT poets. That'll probably be near the end of May. It'll continue into June and then through July, like I did last year, because I don't simply just want to talk about LGBT poets in the month of June. And the good thing is, like last year I did it outside of June, but I've also just been steadily reading more LGBT poets and talking about them on the channel here for Poetry Thursday. So it doesn't just stop at June like so many other people, especially brands and corporations. They're caring about these individuals and the larger systemic problems that they face ends in June. I always feel the need to stress that, especially when it comes to Pride Month and whatnot. Anyway, that was the wrap up and TBR. If you have any recommendations for me, or you simply want to comment on something that I said I was going to be reading, do so in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about books. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about these books that I'm referencing if they don't already know. And join the Discord if you want to continue to have weird conversations about books and video games. And 1999's The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser, if you're interested in that. But other than that, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and May travels. Farewell.